Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we're visiting with someone who might very well be the most influential individual in the 50-year history of mass participation running and exercise. I'm talking about Dr. Kenneth Cooper, the father of aerobics, which was the title of his famous book in 1968.
Today, at 94, Ken's still going strong, still exercising, and still spreading the word about how a regular exercise program will improve almost anyone's health and vigor. He's also written a new book with an enticing title, Grow Healthier as You Grow Older.
I know I like the name, the sound of that title, George. I can't wait to read a little bit more of it. I'm halfway through right now. But here's a little known additional fact about Dr. Cooper. When he was a student at Harvard in the early 1960s, he finished the Boston Marathon twice with a best time of 3:24. Not shabby at all. But before we speak with Ken, we want to review the biggest recent news in running. George, what has been making the biggest impression on you?
You know, on our last podcast, Amby, you and I talked during the Tokyo World Championships, and we talked about some of the events that had already taken place. So let me just do a really quick wrap with a couple of what I think are highlights that we just have to keep in mind as we celebrate that great competition. And the first one is Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone. She is an athlete for the ages. We've known this as we watched her dominate the 400-meter hurdles, become the world record holder, and then lower her world record and win the Olympic championship in Paris in that event. I mean, she's just been spectacular. And this time, she gets out of her comfort zone to run the 400-meter flat. And I think our listeners should know these require many of the same skills and speed and strength, but they're different events and certainly technically different. So for her to do that and take on two of the best ever who'd ever run this event, was a courageous kind of a move for Sydney, and she was spectacular in the rounds. She lowered a 19-year-old American record that had been sitting there, Sandra Richards-Ross's record. And then in the final, my gosh, Amby, she was just spectacular. She ran the fastest 400 meters ever run in the last 40 years. And you and I know, and people who are close to the sport know, that world record that was set 40 years ago has always been the subject of considerable skepticism. Marita Koch's the East German record, people have always kind of put a mental asterisk around it. So what Sydney did was something, and then she topped it all off in the rain, anchoring the U.S. relay team. She had it all by herself when she got the stick, but it didn't stop her from breaking 48 seconds again on a really wet track. I guess there's just something about watching Sydney for me, Amby. It's her focus, her calm determination, and when the gun goes off, that elegance of form. And she doesn't run as much as other elite athletes, but every one of her performances is something special and a treat for the spectators in this sport. Can't say enough about her. The second person who really came into her own this year, Melissa Jefferson Wooden. She was a great sprinter last year. She even medaled in the Paris Olympics. This year, she just took off. And now, 3 gold medals in this Olympics, the 100, the 200, the 4x100 relay. And she won her races convincingly, I should tell you. She now is the world's top sprinter. And I mean that male or female. So she has had a year that is just extraordinary. Can't say enough about her performances in Tokyo. And then last, Amby, you and I talked a lot a year ago about the 1,500 meter race, men's race in Paris, where Cole Hocker sneaked in on the inside and stole the race in the final step. Here, he was DQ'd from the 1,500, but he didn't let it, get him down. He had qualified for the 5,000. He came back, and what a race. Amby, 400 meters to go. They were all there. Cole Hocker was in 12th place with 400 meters to go. And this time it wasn't sneaking in from the inside. He just came off the final turn and put on the afterburners, and he won the race. And it was a dazzling race for what I thought was an incredible world championship, a reminder of what it is we really love about this sport.
So when I look at what's been happening recently, thank you for that, George. I'll add one more thing to the World Championships. The Kenyan women, unbelievable. I think they won everything from the 800 meters to the marathon. Some of them were expected very much, and a couple were surprises. But boy, did they have a meet. Couple of things I've been looking at. One, I just want to acknowledge our friend Kira D'Amato. She just set an American Masters record for the half marathon in Copenhagen, which not a lot of people have recognized, but she ran 109.17 to break the record previously held by Dina Castor at 109.36. And in perfect timing, Kira also has a book that has just come out. It's called Don't Call It a Comeback. I have read it. It's an interesting book. It's almost off-putting at the beginning because it is written in such a strong girl sleepover party lingo, which isn't my normal lingo. But after a while, you get into it and you feel that she's really telling things that other elite runners haven't revealed before. They're kind of cautious for the most part. Kira lets go of everything, and so it does make compelling reading. The saddest thing this week was the recent announcement of the Boston Marathon field for next year. It shouldn't be sad. It should be a cause for celebration, of course. But once again, they had to tell 9,000 runners who had gotten Boston qualifying times that was not actually good enough to qualify for the Boston Marathon. This, I think, is a travesty. It's so familiar, similar to that famous Jerry Seinfeld episode where he shows up at a car rental counter and he says, "Okay, I'd like my car." And they say, "Well, we've got your reservation, but we don't actually have a car for you." And he goes into a long... goes into a long harangue from there. Nobody's asking me, especially not anyone at the Boston Marathon, but I've got a solution. Here it is, short and simple. We now know that Boston is willing to admit about 24,000 qualified by time runners. That's been steady for several years. Here's my path. Boston should set next year's Boston Marathon qualifying times at a number that will let in about 22,000 runners. They will actually be guaranteed entry into the marathon if they hit the qualifying times that are established. In September, Boston holds a first registration. It gets the entries or the applications from all these runners. And if it actually goes beyond 22,000 to 24,000, fine, that's it. The whole thing is over. But in all likelihood, they'd come up 1,000 or two short. And at that point, they would hold a second registration. They would say, send us your applications if you're within 10 minutes of the times we published recently. They take those new applications, they put them in rank order, fastest first, and they continue filling the field until they hit their 24,000 number. This method would be abrupt. It would be a change. It would require vast changes in the Boston Marathon qualifying times, but nobody would get rejected after qualifying, and a few would actually get a surprise entry at the last minute. So it would be all good and nothing bad, in my opinion. And I've also got one addition.
You got my vote on that. I like it, Andy.
See how you like this? This is the additional wrinkle, George. I think the Boston qualifying standards should actually be scaled to be somewhat easier for the older age groups. This would serve several important purposes. Particularly, it would increase the lifelong motivation for all runners to stay out there, keep training, keep running, because the Boston Marathon standards would actually get a little bit easier as you get older. And that's it for our review this week of the biggest recent news in the world of running. This week's guest on running, State of the Sport, Ken Cooper is known globally as the father of aerobics and an early pioneer in the exercise is medicine revolution.
Ken's pivotal book, titled simply Aerobics, was published in 1968 and received universal acclaim. Eventually, it was translated into 41 languages in Braille. What a lot of people don't know, however, is that Ken ran the Boston Marathon twice, in 1962 and 63, with a best time of 3:24.
This summer, Ken, who is now 94, published his 20th book, 20 that is. This book is titled Grow Healthier as You Grow Older, which I think is about as good a title as anyone could come up with. Dr. Cooper, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Amby and George. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've been looking forward to this interview.
We as well. And let's start it off with a quick update on your bio. Where are you living these days? What's your family situation? And what do you do on a typical day?
Well, I was born and raised in Oklahoma City. First 26 years of my life were in Oklahoma. The rest of the time I've been in Texas, except for the 2 years in Boston from 61 to 63. No, I ran in high school. I did my senior year. I won the state championship in the mile run. Yes, I didn't start running until I was in actually middle school, junior high school. I wasn't running for a track team at all, but used to be running from one building to the next to go to lunch. And the gentleman who was a principal of the school I was attending noticed I was a pretty good runner. So at 16 years of age, he asked me to participate in running the 880 in a nearby community. And so I'd never run before, but this is during my sophomore year in high school. But I placed first in running on just an open field. They weren't even a track. So that's the beginning of my running, and it resulted in me having a career of running in high school and in college. It started when I won the state championship in the mile run as a senior in 1949. My coach was only the principal at the high school. We did not have a track, a quarter-mile track there at Putnam City, suburb of Oklahoma City. So I ran in the fields, I ran in the streets. And on my own, I ran up to 30, 40 miles a week. And so I continued doing that. And then when I won the state championship in the 1 mile run, I qualified for the state championship in the 882. But I almost set a new state record. Missed by 1 second, ran 4:31. The record was 4:30. And so I was so fatigued, I didn't even try to compete in the 880, which I ran later. My best time on the 880 was 2 minutes flat. Best time on the mile, as I said, was 4:31. But that did give me a scholarship to the University of Oklahoma, where I ran for 3 years there. I ran cross country and I ran the mile. But unfortunately, the coach I had, John Jacobs, was a great coach as far as teaching or training quarter mile runners. Didn't know a thing about distance running. So I'd been running 40 or 50 miles a week when I started at OU. They cut me down to 15 miles a week because back in those days, this is before the 4-minute mile was broken. It was 1956. I'm talking about 1949 to 1952. But the feeling was the first person to break the 4-minute mile would be a sprinter. It wouldn't be a distance runner. So we ran lots of 100s, 200s, 400s, 440s, etc. And the coach chewed me out once weekend with my running buddies. The two of us ran 9 miles on a Sunday afternoon just in disgust because he wasn't letting us run enough. But that was one thing I remember, that I didn't feel I had adequate training because of the coaching, so I never ran faster than 4:18 when I was in college. If I'd continued with my running that I know now, what was necessary for those world-class athletes I talk about in the new book, those gentlemen have been running 100 miles a week for many, many years. So if I continue with a higher level of running more miles, I think I may be able to bring my time down under 4:18. So that was my running career.
It certainly sounds like you had a lot more aerobic ability, a lot more endurance ability than your college coaches were able to get out of you with that strange training. What's interesting is it was just a couple of years later that you were running the Boston Marathon. You ran it twice back to back. I'm curious, did you train seriously for Boston, or did you just jump into it as a lark like so many? And what was the experience like for you?
Well, I reactivated the running my first year in Boston. That was back in 1962. And I met a man at the Brigham Hospital named Dr. Bose Guile. And he knew Johnny Kelly quite well. And so he arranged for me to start running with Johnny Kelly. Ooh. Also, I spent the first year at Harvard School of Public Health getting my master's in public health. But the second year, I extended the time up there to get a Doctor of Science in Exercise Physiology. So along with that, I had to get my doctorate in Exercise Physiology. I had to do several things. One thing I had to do is be able to read in 2 foreign languages. And I chose German, which I used in college, and I started from scratch to learn Russian. So I had to be qualified in those 2 areas. Had to meet the qualification to get the second doctorate degree there. And the third thing was to have a thesis. I wasn't able to finish my thesis. But what happened, though, I did train as a part of trying to qualify for the thesis, train in an altitude chamber. They had one in the basement there at the School of Public Health, hadn't been used in years, and so we activated it. And with a colleague who stayed with me, I exercised starting at least 6 weeks or more before the Boston Marathon, that I started training at 10,000 feet for 45 minutes, 3 days a week.
Oh, my gosh.
So I was doing that to try to increase my aerobic capacity by training at sea level. And that was the topic of my thesis. Could we improve aerobic capacity by training an altitude chamber at sea level? And so I worked up over a period of weeks to 15,000 feet, 45 minutes, twice a week. And I was as cyanotic as you can believe. But I had a friend there in with me to keep me from passing out. But I gave myself blood doping. There's no question about it. I increased my red blood cell count and all that by just continuous hypoxic exposure. And that's the reason I brought my times down from 354 down to 324, was because I trained at altitude. So that was a phenomenon that very few people know about. But I did have quite an experience in running that first Boston Marathon because of course, I trained with Johnny Kelly. That's a different story we'll talk about in a minute. But I wasn't really experienced in running the marathon. So that boarding it was, of course, the only shoes we had back in those days were New Balance athletic shoes with ripple soles, looked like a saddle oxer, as you may recall, with no heel. And we all had to put sponge rubber with the heel to keep getting Achilles tendonitis. And they had webbing over the toes. And I discovered what that was for. That was let the blood out. Because that morning it was raining, and the veterans told me, you need to take your socks off because that's going to slow you down. Stupidity. So by the time I finished the marathon, it was only 150 of us ran back in those days, and they had podiatrists to take care of us. So everybody had foot problems. So I stood in line there to see the podiatrist, but my feet were in bad shape. And so he looked at my feet in amazement. He asked me, son, when did you get those blisters? I said, I got those at Framingham. And that was 7 miles to the 26 miles. I remember his amazing response. He said, son, you don't need a foot doctor. You need a head doctor. That was my introduction to the second Boston Marathon. That was the finish of my career as far as running marathons. So I continued to run faithfully after that 5 and 10Ks until back in 2024, 21 years ago, when I broke my leg snow skiing after 52 years of snow skiing, never an injury. I fell up at Beaver Creek, Colorado. We've had a home up there for some 40 years. And I fell and got a tibial plateau fracture. That's in the knee, and those don't heal well. So I had to have surgery, 2 pins put in and all of that. Mm-hmm. And that wiped out my running career and wiped out my jogging and my snow skiing. But it did not knock out my exercise because I've said in all my books that fitness is a journey, not a destination. To get benefits, you have to do it for the rest of your life. I'm convinced that is true. That's why I still exercise in that. But you transition. If you can't run, you do something else. So I've transitioned to recumbent cycling. And what I try to get is 30 minutes of recumbent cycling with a heart rate about 120 to 130. And we have this fantastic fitness center here in Dallas, one of the most premier centers that we have in this country. We have 4,000 members and a waiting list of people trying to join our club. It's so popular. So I do that 5 days a week, 30 minutes on a recumbent cycle. That's where I watch Snooze on television. And then I finish with a 10-minute exercise program in which I'm building up muscle mass. But I still have catering to that right knee. I've ended up with a weakness in my right quadricep muscle. That's the muscle from the knee up to the hip. So I don't have the same strength in my right knee, right leg that I have my left leg, and there's a tendency for me to fall. Now, so I can control the pain, so they won't give me a total knee replacement surgery. That wouldn't be of any value to me. But you need to get involved in physiotherapy. So I'm involved now in a training program called Muscle Activation Technique. I wasn't even familiar with that. Our physiotherapists here on the staff at our Aerobics Center have that availability to teach me. So I've been doing that, and I found that I have regained the strength in my quadricep muscle I didn't have before. It was almost totally inactive. So I've been able to compensate. I'm no longer in fear of falling because of muscle activation. That's a very important thing because I was taught in medical school, one of those myths of aging, you can't build up muscle mass after 50 years of age because of sarcopenia, you start losing mass unless you make a major effort to rebuild using musculoskeletal conditioning. So I thought that was true. I didn't believe this muscle activation would work, but there's an article published at Tufts University many years ago, the medical school. They took a group of older men and had them do some leg lifts. And they did this for 36 weeks, exercising quite a few minutes every day. And they found that they could increase the strength of the quadricep muscle by 160%, could increase the size of quadricep muscle by 9% and increase their walking speed, even though their average age was 90.4. So that's one of those myths we've been able to turn around. You can build up muscle mass. I'm availing myself of that at the present time. So it's been
I'm going to ask you to take a breath and get your oxygen level back in a steady state. Now, George and I would like to go back and ask you a few more, maybe Boston or John Kelly related questions. George, have you got something?
Yeah, I've got one. I mean, we talked about some setbacks, the blisters in Boston, the knee problems. But Ken, sometime, I think in your late 20s, you thought you were having a heart attack, but you learned that you were simply out of shape. And was this a shock for a young adult, someone who'd been so fit? And how did it change the direction of your life?
Well, my whole life was changed. Of course, when I finished my athletic career at the University of Oklahoma with the medical school, I didn't have time to exercise. And back in those days, we thought that exercise just was for competition. We didn't know that exercise is medicine, which we've proven now. So I ignored my exercise. And the most common manifestation of stress is obesity. So I ate to compensate for that when I was in medical school. And then when I went on to internship, my running weight in college was about 165 to 168. And I was about 6 foot in height. But then I started gaining weight. And so by the time I finished my internship with 6 years of doing nothing, but just trying to keep up with things, I weighed 204 pounds.
Oh, wow.
I did my internship in Seattle, Washington, and it made arrangements. I was deferred from the draft for a couple of years, so I had to pay back some time. But as soon as I finished my military career, I was going back to Portland, Oregon, and become an ophthalmologist. That was my plan. But then what happened during that 6 years of inactivity, I became pre-diabetic and hypertensive. And so when I tried to water ski again for the first time in years, at 29 years of age, about halfway through the slalom course, I had chest pain. And my heart rate was just beating out of control. They got me over to the shore. By the time I got over there stretched out, the heart rate came back to normal. The pain disappeared. I was still in the Air Force at that time. So the next day, I had a complete examination of the School of Aerospace Medicine in San Antonio, Texas. And after a complete diagnostic workup, they said, Doc, the only thing wrong with you is you're out of shape. 29 years of age, overweight, inactive American male. And that shocked me back to reality. So I lost the weight within 6 months. I ran my first marathon a year later. And I ran for 40 years and 38,000 miles before I finally had to give it up. But that changed my life, but it changed my profession. I thought that what happened to me, this is something I was taught in medical school, that preventive medicine is the Cinderella of the medical, especially because there's no profit in health. The profit's in disease, and most physicians don't think that. And so I had no idea I'd be going into a field specializing in preventive medicine. And so that was one of the epiphanies in my life that changed my direction. And so I focused from there on to concentrate on the field of preventive medicine and become a specialist in the field. And you'll find in the book, there's a strong divine intervention in my life throughout the book, the epiphanies. And that's just one of the epiphanies that changed my direction. I hadn't planned on doing what I'm doing now. And now we have a worldwide program here. Let me give you an example of that. We have 4 documentaries. You can go to our Cooper Aerobics Wellness Aerobics website. And under media, you can find 4 documentaries under the power of prevention. And one of these is 42 minutes in length, called the power of prevention and impact aerobics worldwide. We presented this publicly to the public back in November 2023 at the Bush Library here in Dallas. It was picked up by CNN. They sent a reporter down not to video me, but just to interview me. You can still go to CNN and type in homepage, Cooper Exercise, and get that interview. They told me the other day it's been downloaded by 729 million, 60,000 people around the world. What started as an idea, now is worldwide.
Wow.
Ken, when you wrote Aerobics in 1968, I personally think that really changed the trajectory of health and exercise and fitness in the country and the world. But I believe not everybody agreed with me or with what you wrote. Did you get a lot of blowback and criticism?
That's the understatement of the day. The street's going to be full of dead joggers and more Americans follow Cooper. I'm going to kill as many people as Hitler did. I was speaking.
I shouldn't laugh.
I was speaking at a medical meeting many years ago, well, shortly after they came out, and there was one of my harshest critics in the audience. And after I talked about my aerobics book, explained what it was, he got up and said, I want you to know what this aerobics book will do for you. Put it in your rear pocket, and it'll cushion the fall when you die of a heart attack. That was at a public professional meeting. I had to go through that type of criticism. I first came to Dallas in 1970, with 2 office and 2 employees. I had to go before the board of censors because I was doing something as maximum performance treadmill stress test. I pioneered that in the Air Force. I know over 1,000 stress tests in the Air Force. We did that in working with NASA, trying to provide some programs for the NASA astronauts. But they were so convinced I was going to kill people, they tried to take my license away. That was back in 1970. But I gave a very nice presentation to the board about the value of stress testing because I pointed out that the most common first symptom of severe heart disease is sudden death. Now, we had done all these treadmill stress tests and found we know over 300,000 now here at the Cooper Clinic. And we find that 16.1% are abnormal equivocal, but only 5% knew they had a problem before they had the stress test. And so 11% of the people coming to our clinic now, 150,000 patients in our database, 300,000 treadmill stress tests, we're picking up heart disease before it causes any symptom. And that's why the treadmill stress is now ubiquitous. It's all over the world because, well, that's the first step. Our goal here at the Cooper Clinic is to try to prevent cancer and heart disease. If we can't prevent it, diagnose it early. And that's why people coming to this clinic at least 20 times over the past 45 years, we got the death certificates, they're living 10 years longer than the national average. Our women are averaging 90.4 years, or 86.5 years. That's an average of 88.6 years for our population, which is 10 years longer than the national average. And they're enjoying good, healthy lives up until the last moment. We call it squaring off the curve. They're condensing the time of senility and senescence to a short period immediately prior to death. If I go that way, praise the Lord, I've had a wonderful life.
So, Ken, we're talking a little about the Cooper Clinic here, and we know that an awful lot of well-known, memorable people have gone through it, including the aforementioned John Kelly, who finished 58 Boston marathons, winning 2 of them. And he used to speak about his visits to the Cooper Clinic and his conversations with you. So tell us why you were so interested in old John, and what did you learn from him?
I learned from running with him. I couldn't keep up with him. I know we ran Dr. Guy on to train with Johnny.
Not many could.
One Sunday morning, I remember we ran 10 miles. And about 2 miles to finish, he said, Doc, if you don't mind, I'm going to run on in. And he beat me by a mile by the time we finished the 10 miles. That's the kind of guy. I really had great respect for him. Wonderful guy. But no, we invited him to come down to our clinic in Dallas because you're training for this. I think he was 83 years of age or so for his final marathon. And to see if it was safe. And so he came to the clinic. He did quite well. And so it hit the public press. And he kept asking, Johnny, how you know it's safe at this advanced stage to run the Boston Marathon? You're a 60th marathon or so. He said, because my doctor, Ken Cooper, said that. Every time I read that, every time I heard that, I thought, Lord, don't please let him die. And that he didn't die, thank the Lord. But he stopped. His wife passed away, and he kept running until about 95 years of age. But he stopped running. And then he finally passed away. He was a good friend, a great supporter. If it hadn't been for Johnny Kelly, I would have run those marathons.
Ken, in 1968, when you wrote Aerobics, neither you nor anyone could have foreseen the huge worldwide running boom that has happened over the last 50 years. Here's a direct question. What has been the best health aspect of the running boom, and what are the downsides, if there are any?
Well, first of all, we've proven that the athletic heart is a good heart, because I was taught in medical school that if you run too much, you get an athletic heart because the heart increases in size. And back in medical school days, all we could see was with a chest x-ray that the silhouette of the heart had increased in size, and thought that was muscle. That was muscle to some extent, but what we couldn't see, didn't have echocardiograms in those days, it was because the heart dilated. And that means the heart could pump out more blood with each stroke. We call that ejection fraction, and that's one of the characteristics of being aerobically fit. Now, why do you think the heart rate goes down in endurance athlete? Because average American male, 72 beats per minute. Average American female, 78 beats per minute. All of us know that have been running for years, your heart rate drops into the 40s and the 50s. It's a conservation of energy. That's what the good Lord provided for us. We could increase the heart's ability to function and do more work with less effort. And that's why all these endurance runners we're testing are living longer than the national average, because they have that benefit of a more efficient heart and to work hard over the years. So we completely demyth that the athletic heart is the normal heart. It's the desired heart. It's not a heart that you need to worry about. My father was so convinced, as I mentioned, he never saw me run. He never saw me play basketball, practicing tennis, but he was convinced, as was the medical profession back in those days, you're going to die early. He was convinced. He never saw me run. He never saw me play a basketball game. About lived in about 18 years. I just wish I'd known then what I know now. I thought the man would have lost.
So, Ken, when your book first came out, were you surprised by its success? Because, not everyone gets to issue a message and then see it reverberate literally around the globe. And not many doctors certainly become famous overnight. And how was all of that for you?
Well, first of all, let me explain, because asked so many times, it wasn't Jane Fonda that had been in aerobics. That was aerobic dancing. And she didn't come out until 1981. My book was 1968. Well, first of all, was the definition of aerobics. And it was published in 1986 in the Oxford University Press in London. It's a method of physical exercise for reducing beneficial changes in the respiratory and circulatory system by activities which require only a modest increase in oxygen and so can be maintained. That's the official definition I gave to the English dictionary to publish. And by the way, we've got a group coming in from London to film our conference here, film our center here, and have a podcast in the near future, because I'm going to be having a podcast in London now. That's coming up. So the worldwide impact of this has been phenomenal. But I had no idea when this all started. My wife is typing the manuscript of that first manuscript on a typewriter back in those days. We thought if we get our parents to get by one of these books, we'd be lucky. So we had no idea the impact of that. So the impact was unbelievable. The public accepted, the medical profession did not. It wasn't until many years later, really, because when I left the Air Force and established my clinic in Dallas, I actually established my research institute 6 months before I saw my first patient in December 1970, because I had to have scientific fact to prove what I'd said in the Air Force, particularly with the population with an average age of 28. I had 27,000 people, Air Force personnel, involved in a program, 15,000 exercises, 12,000 controls. And I would fly these various bases, Air Force bases, and would run the 12-minute test or a 1.5-mile run to prove the aerobic point system that it worked. All this was extensive research that we did. And with the continued research we've done with our database now of 150,000 patients and 2.2 million persons of follow-up, we've published over 700 papers in the scientific literature proving that exercise is best. So what I want to do from day one is I wanted to bridge that gap between fadism and scientific legitimacy using exercise to practice medicine. And now the results are too impressive to be ignored.
Ken, George and I are a little bit curious and can't resist asking you who's the fittest, fastest runner who you've ever seen down on your treadmills at the Cooper Lab. But then my real bigger question is, no matter how much you talk about the health benefits of running in aerobics, people are going to say to you, but Ken, there's knee replacements everywhere. There's hip replacements everywhere. Exercise is wearing people out. How do you respond to that?
Easy. When I broke my leg snow skiing, that was 24 years ago, and I had MRI scans of both knees. The right knee revealed the tibial plateau fracture. The left knee looked like a teenager. And I had 38,000 miles doing that 40 years. and on both knees. So I came to the conclusion, I think this is true, running isn't going to aggravate the knees and the hips. It may actually protect the knees and hips, but it will aggravate a pre-existing condition. So if you have a pre-existing condition in one knee, you're going to have problems with it. Yeah, but you have to pay attention. One of my famous statements is listen to your body. Start to listen to your body. If you start knees, your hips start body and change. There's 41 different exercises you can do that qualify as being aerobics. So you don't have to. You can swim. You can do all sorts of things. Cycle if you have a knee problem. So again, there's no excuse for having to have knee surgery if you just listen to your body. Also, we recommend too that you take Joint Health, just one of our products we recommend. That can tend to protect you from these changes in the knees that tend to occur. So there's ways around that. And just to think that 38,000 miles on both knees, and I look like a teenager. So I did not have any problem with my knees or my hips. I have not to this day.
Do you remember who the fastest runner is that you've had at the clinic? Okay, that's pretty fast.
Yeah, you have to look at the book. The whole section of the book is we talk about elite athletes. I talk about training the Brazilian World Cup training team that won the World Championship, Mexico State 1970. Details there on that. Of course, they ran because of Pele. They won because of Pele, but they were highly trained by Captain Claudio Coutinho and myself. They were trained by the Cooper method. If you go to the internet and ask what's the most famous soccer team, football team in the history of the World Cup, it's the 1970 World Cup Championship because they won 6 consecutive matches, winning and retiring the World Cup. And they were in such great shape, they overwhelmed the opposition in the second half. And 4 of those matches were tied at the half. Those matches were 1 goal ahead. And they were tied 1-1 with Italy in the finals at the half. They won 4-1. I became an icon in Brazil. I've been there 21 times now. And I've run with people all over Brazil, from southern to northern Brazil. But no, that was the thing. But the other section of the book is work with those 20 world-class athletes, including C. Protein, Frank Shorter, Don Cardone, people like that. They came down, and we evaluated them with a group of scientific investigators around the country. And one thing we looked at is elite athlete born or made? That's a big question. Is this genetic predisposition or something they can compensate for? So to do that, we did muscle biopsies on the outside of the leg, lower leg. And we find it's well known that elite runners, distance runners, have a lot of slow twitch fibers. And the sprinters are fast twitch fibers. So slow twitch fibers is what you want for the runner. And these gentlemen averaged 80% slow twitch fibers. I had my muscle body. It was 55%, so about half and half. But there was one man had less than I had, but they were twice the size of anybody else. So his was 45, mine was 55. The other guys were 80, 85. And the guy's name was Don Cardone, and he raced 4th in the Olympic marathon in Montreal in 1976. So again, we came to the conclusion athletes can be born or made, and he's certainly a compensate for he didn't inherit from his genetics by over distance. And those guys ran, and I said 100 miles a week. As a part of our evaluation, we had a psychiatrist to interview all these guys. What motivates a guy to run 100 miles a week for all these years? He finally came to the conclusion they were all very stupid. No, it wasn't that. He said they were highly disciplined. And the other statement of the day was they were highly disciplined. So that's in the book. You'll get a kick out of that in the book about reading about particularly. And we predicted, based upon putting all these figures together, we predicted among these world-class athletes, Frank Shorter and all these people, who would run it. And it wasn't one of the world-class athletes. It was Gary Tuttle. And Gary Tuttle was unknown at that time. He won the 6-mile race. And he won it in averaging about 4 minutes and 50 seconds a mile for 6 miles. And he won that. But he had won the 24-hour race. The reason he was invited by Frank Shorter and all to come down and participate in this event. But it's all documented in the book. You'll find it very interesting.
So, Ken, when you wrote Aerobics, did you have any idea that in another decade after that, you'd see a worldwide running boom that's only grown larger and larger since the 1970s?
I had no idea the magnitude response. I thought people wouldn't continue because there's pain that's associated with running, conditioning, all that. And most people they have I have an acronym why people don't want to exercise. TEMMPF. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the motivation. I don't have the money. I don't have the place, and it's not fun. Those are people say reason they can't exercise. I tell people too, you're missing a major part of your life if you don't embrace the aerobic concept. Because we've found that people who are physically fit, they're different psychologically. They are less depressed. They're less of a hypochondriac, improved self-image, much more positive attitude towards life, and fewer somatic complaints. Isn't that what you want? That's the way you want to enjoy life? I've had hundreds of letters and people tell me, I wish I'd known 20 years ago how much better I could feel. But once I got in good shape, I couldn't really realize the difference in the way I felt. I want to feel good. I feel good now at my advanced age of 94. I'm in my 95th year, and I still continue what I've been teaching and preaching all those years.
Ken, I want to turn now to exercise and aging, which is, of course, the topic of your new book and a topic of great interest to all of us because, frankly, we're all aging, no matter where we start. I think you're the one who first said, we don't stop exercising because we grow old. We grow old because we stop exercising. What does exercise add to one's aging life?
Well, as I've said, it adds a dimension that we didn't really know. It's proven in the book with what we call the Medicare study. We took a group of men and women, 50 years of age, came to our clinic, 50 years of age, plus or minus a year. Well, for 25 years, he got their Medicare date from 65 to 75 years of age. And the only thing we looked at was their level of fitness monitored by time on their treadmill. To look at their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their diabetes, only their time on the treadmill. Very poor, fair, good, excellent, superior. And we found those people, the top 20 percentile compared with the bottom 20 percentile, all healthy. We found that 36% less Alzheimer's dementia in the top category than had in the bottom category. They had 40% reduction in chronic kidney disease requiring dialysis. They had 25% reduction in all types of cancer and 25% reduction of congestive heart failure. But the big thing, the cost of Medicare from 65 to 75 years of age was 40% less in the top category as the bottom category. Now, what do you want now? If you get all those benefits, plus the psychological benefits you get, prolongation of life, reduce the cost of health care. I've given all these statistics to people like Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, our two U.S. senators, sitting in my office. And they said, we got to get this information back to Washington. I've been trying to do that for 40 years with no success. I've been the personal physician for George W. Bush for many, many years. And I went to Washington 8 times to do his examination. And he was the most highly conditioned president we ever had. And he exercised on a bicycle even while he was in Washington. Came back, retired, came to Dallas. He'd always done well, but it's mentioned in the book. But then his exercise stress test after he had retired changed. And so I immediately got him over to the hospital at an angio. We do the stress test here, and then we have this abnormal, have a high calcification score of the coronary arteries, and abnormal stress test. We do an angiogram on him. We do it in the clinic here by injecting dye into their arm. Showed he had severe obstruction of one of the widowmakers, LAD, left arterial descending vessel. And then he got in the hospital. Within 4 hours, we had an angioplasty stent done. And that was 10 years ago. So coming to the Cooper Clinic probably saved the life of George W. Bush. And he's still a patient at this clinic. That's just one of the examples we have in the book. And remember that your life is very precious. And biblically, our body should last us 120 years. The reason they don't is not because of the design deficiency. It's the way we treat our bodies. So give people a chance. I just finished an interview yesterday, a podcast with Jack LaLanne's wife, Elaine. She's now approaching 100 years of age, and she's still exercising. With the podcast, she showed how much muscle she has in her arm. Is that possible that close to 100 years of age you can do that? It is that. And to see people come in on an annual basis and improve their time on the treadmill, they're getting in better shape as they get older. Come on, I've seen that with over 300,000 performance treadmill sets. So don't dive something soon, because no drug can replicate the benefits of an active lifestyle.
Ken, as you're saying, the benefits of exercise seem relatively simple compared to diet. So in diet, there's so many different approaches and Some seem to us rather strange or restrictive. What are your thoughts on healthy diet, and what are the key principles?
Well, first of all, the people who are having success from a clinic, you'll see in the book, are people who get Cooperized. And number one on that list is get your weight under control, body mass index from 18 to 25. Number two is proper diet. And number three is exercise. Doesn't go to exercise just well, but because all we're saying don't need to run marathons or 5Ks, whatever it may be. All you need to do is get 30 minutes of exercise, collective or sustained, most days per week. That's an average of 150 minutes per week. It's exactly the recommendation of the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Heart Association and others. So little. The most famous study we have as far as exercise was published November the 3rd, 1989, in the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled Physical Fitness All-Cause Mortality. And we showed in a long study if people can move up one block on the fitness scale from very poor to poor, they get a 6-year increase in longevity and a 58% reduction in all causes of death. It went all the way to the end. The top category of fitness is only a 9-year increase in longevity and 65% reduction in death all causes. The best return on your fitness investment is to avoid inactivity. If you get that 30 minutes, 5 days, I can guarantee you, you'll go from category 1 to at least category 2 or category 3. That's the exercise. Going back to diet, I try to simplify it. And I say 5 is fine, 9 is divine. That's the number of servings of fruits and vegetables you should be consuming on a daily basis. Now, the average American adult, 3.1. Average American teenager, 1.6. But also, I recommend vitamin supplementation. At the top of that list, I recommend vitamin D. I take my daily multivitamin, but I take 5,000 units in addition to that. I take 7,000 units of vitamin D a day. Why? Because our studies have shown that may protect you from coming down with COVID-19 or these coronaviruses that we've had over the years, we'll have in the future. And we've proven that in our studies here in Dallas. And look at vitamin D levels for the people who have some protection from COVID. If they get a blood level up to at least 40, they have protection. Mine runs 65 to 70. The toxic level is 150. Average American sun exposure is around 15 to 20. They have no protection because it's not the virus that causes the problem. It's the body's immune response called a cytokine storm that can be suppressed only by vitamin D. So I'm making it simple with your diet. Just control your weight, control your diet. I have very little red meat in my diet. I exist primarily on chicken and fish, and I take my vitamins. And I maintain my weight now between 165, between 160 and 165. Well, almost the same thing I weighed when I was in high school and college. After being way up there to 204, I dropped back and I've kept that weight off because I weigh almost daily. And that's one way to keep your weight under control. I adjust my caloric consumption based upon what I weigh. So do that. But it's not that hard. This GLP-1 is a major thing as far as getting people to lose weight. But can you get it off and keep it off is the question. But the big thing now, those people using GLP-1 to lose weight, they're losing muscle mass along with it. And now there's strong recommendations. You want these injections to lose weight, you better get involved in an exercise program or you're going to find you lose weight and you're very weak after you've lost that weight. So we're trying to keep things in proper perspective, using the scientific aspects of this to give people guidance and recommendation based on the undeniable scientific facts.
Ken, you just raised an issue that I was going to ask you about. So here comes the question. When you wrote Aerobics in 1968, I don't think you wrote anything much about strength training. Now strength training is believed to be very important. Why is muscle strength important? And the next question is the big one. Should we really believe that exercise can slow cognitive decline and Alzheimer's and all of those issues?
Well, we've already shown, as I told you, that following a Medicare study, the people that are top categories of fitness had 36% less Alzheimer's and dementia. Because one thing that's in the book is chronic inflammation. That's something that physicians aren't even measuring. You measure this by the C-reactive protein. Physicians aren't doing that. Because the one thing that causes dementia is you can have a brain full of amyloid plaque or tau protein related to dementia and Alzheimer's, but you have to have something to activate that. And to activate that is chronic inflammation. The ways to reduce chronic inflammation is lose weight and get in shape and take omega-3. So people realize that there may be a dramatic change in the number of people worldwide that are coming to suffer from Alzheimer's. And that's why I don't want to. So I said, if I die tomorrow, that's where I want to go. I don't want to have the last 4 or 5 years of my life I can't recognize my own family. And I see patients like that all the time. The two famous words I hear over the years, if only. If only I'd listened to you 15 or 20 years ago, I wouldn't be in the shape I'm in today. In back part of time, that is, so don't die of something stupid. A lot of people are doing that. So I don't want to come to the clinic. They might find something wrong. But don't you understand? We may find it later. If you come in earlier, I could pick up with you and save your life. But now we have so much data to prove that you can't argue with that. And my example personally, my 95th year, is to prove it can be done. That you can grow healthy as you grow older. But that starts at day one. So if you're 50 years of age, if you still have life, there's still hope.
Ken, we've taken a lot of your time and your own. I always knew you were an exerciser, but your cognitive sharpness and your command of all of the medical studies around exercise is just fantastic. It's very impressive. We end our podcast by giving you 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3, for yourself, for those closest to you, for the country, for fitness in the world. What 3 fairy godmother wishes might you have?
I would use what I have in the book. What's the most important thing at this stage of my life? Beforehand, faith, family, friends, and think about that. Faith, family, friends, and fitness. I can testify to that. And again, if people want to get a copy of the book, you can go to Amazon.com and get them quite regularly. But the other thing that I want to tell you too, that I have a rule in my book as far as you're getting older, you need to have more strength training. I used to think aerobics was enough, but I found too many examples of people that concentrate on getting aerobic points and having strength training and suffer from that in the future. So I have the rule now. In your 30s, it should be 80% aerobic and 20% musculoskeletal condition. In your 40s, it's 70 and 30s. In your 50s, it's 60 and 40. And above 55, it's about 50, 55, 45. I'm almost at that level myself now. So I do my 30 minutes on the recumbent bike, but I end up with at least, it's not the relationship, I end up with about 10 minutes of weight training, except 2 days a week I have 1 hour of strength training. So no, I brought strength training like it should be. But remember too, you can be over muscled as well as over fat, and the body's going to suffer either way. But unfortunately, over muscled in the past, and primarily used anabolic steroids. I think that's why people are dying from that. And now I know that's dangerous. I don't want to do that. You need to maintain the muscle mass to be totally fit. I start my day with prayer and Bible study. I end my day with aerobic exercise and muscle training because I want to glorify God in my body and in my spirit. And one of my famous Bible verses, so I put down the book, is Isaiah 40:31. Those that wait upon the Lord, they will regain strength. They will mount wings and soar like eagles. They will run and not be weary, and they will walk and not faint. As Isaiah in the early books of the Bible, they were commanded to exercise. So that's one of the underlying themes that I use. But also I use 1 Timothy 4:8. And physical fitness is all right. But what you need is spiritual fitness, because that prepares all in this life and the life hereafter.
And that is it for our podcast with this week's guest, Dr. Kenneth Cooper, who I'm going to say has perhaps done more to spread the good news about exercise around the world than anyone else on this planet. And we certainly appreciate everything he has done. Ken, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Ken, thanks. This has really been meaningful, fun, and a real privilege for us to discuss all the things we talked about, and particularly your new book. Good luck with that.
Well, George and Amy, I want to thank you because it's been a pleasure talking to someone who is so knowledgeable in the field of exercise. Most people I talk to on these podcasts don't know a thing about it. It's a pleasure, and I want to hope and pray you'll enjoy as long and healthy life as I'm living at 94 years of age.
Amby, neither of us had ever met or talked with Ken Cooper before, So this was an exciting opportunity for us. What did you think of Ken and the conversation that we had with him?
Well, the conversation was fantastic. It exceeded all of my expectations. I was particularly surprised and impressed by his mental sharpness at age 94. I thought he might simply recite to us all the factoids that he's accumulated in his many studies through the years, and he certainly did do that. But he was also so spontaneous and so interested in talking about his own running, and guys like Steve Prefontaine and Don Cardone, who have been to his center. They were there more than 40 years ago, but Ken talked about them as if it was just yesterday, and that was impressive. And of course, I got a nice chuckle about his anecdotes about what happened after he published the Aerobics book. Basically, there were other doctors in Texas who were trying to get his medical license revoked because they said he was going to leave thousands of dead joggers out there on the road. That didn't happen. And thank goodness we don't see that kind of criticism so much anymore. George, what struck you the most about Ken?
It was a pivotal moment in his life when he had a personal health scare at the young age of 29. He experienced chest pain. He had this elevated heart rate while he was water skiing. And he was overweight at the time. He was 204 pounds. And after a full diagnostic workup at the School of Aerospace Medicine, the only finding was that he was out of shape. This event shocked him. It shocked him right back to reality, leading him to lose the weight and to shift his professional focus all the way to preventive medicine. So it was that health scare, the one that I thought was really a game changer for Ken.
And you know, George, we also learned that he hasn't been out of shape since he got that warning. At 94, he's got a vigorous exercise program, a lot of time on the recumbent bike, strength training, a good diet. He's on top of it, and it shows in what great health he's in right now. And so that's it for this week's episode of Running, State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running, State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.